Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Rita Chaudhary from the Department of Ancient Indian History and Culture, University of Calcutta. Now, our paper today of discussion is from the Indian culture. Paper is on polity, and we will be discussing the origin, concept, and nature of state and functions in ancient India. Now, before beginning, you must understand that we did not have any definite school of political philosophy discussing the various problems that usually arise regarding when we consider studying polity. But there was enough speculations among different scholars of our ancient times who have elaborated on the different aspects of Indian polity. It may be a bit difficult to find a straightforward explanation from the texts that we have in hand, but it is also very interesting that we have some major treatises written on Indian polity like the Arthashastra, the most famous being the Arthashastra of Kautilya, where we find elaborations of certain political principles that came to be used in later times by some of the kings of various dynasties. There were different kind of polities in ancient India, some centralized, some decentralized, and there were also other aspects which were influenced the growth of polity in ancient India. And the material and social milieu influenced the same. Now, what we do is what we study today is on the origin of the state in ancient India, the nature and functions that went with it. Now, from the very beginning, we go through the Vedic texts, which are datable from about 1500 to 600 BC. And for the early Vedic period, we look through the Rig Vedas. And the later Samhitas, they elaborate on the later Vedic polity. Now, according to the majority of scholars, the emergence of state polities is made possible by the rise of powerful ruling houses, following more or less the principle of dynastic succession, the formation of a sizable officialdom, a large standing army, and a regular revenue system yielding enough resources to maintain an army and officers of the realm. Now, we must understand that these are some of the important features which a state needs to be called a state. Before all the features came in, we can just say that we are explaining a pre-political setup or something that represents a pre-state polity. Now, a careful survey of early Indian literature, especially the many convincing references in the Niti Shastras, reveals the fact that the ancient Indian political institutions were of an advanced character. The government was responsible and its success depended on popular support and approval to a great extent. Now we go on to the origin of state in ancient India. That takes us back to the Vedic period, when state in India first came into being, when settled life related to territory was substituted for a wandering or nomadic life of the tribes. This is to be seen in the early Vedic period represented by the Rig Veda. This is true of both the Indo-Aryan and non-Aryan racial groups. However, it is difficult at this stage to settle the limits of chronology to make the study thoroughly historical and scientific. This is because it has to be admitted that the non-Aryan, pre-Aryan polity was pretty well advanced when the Indo-Aryan racial element was introduced in ancient India. This is amply proved if we take into account the evidence available from the Harappan civilization. Now here I just add a few words, that it has been said that it has been assumed that the Harappan civilization had a very advanced political setup. There must have been a king or a priest king, as a picture shows. That it has been assumed by scholars that there was some kind of administration, especially municipal administration, because we see a very advanced kind of civilization in the Indus Valley. It has to be conceded, however, that monarchy is definitely indicated as the earliest polity of both North and South India. But in reality, it is the character of the northern polity which helped more to determine the nature of state in India at this early stage. We go on to the Rig Vedic evidence. A close study of the first 9 books of the Rig Veda revealed that the Jono, the whole tribe, once for all settled more or less on a definite piece of territory and formed a small kingdom. There is an echo of how this happened in a passage of the Oitirio Brahman, which is a definite indication of the manner in which the state was formed and monarchy accepted as a form of government. The Oitirio Brahman narrates that once the Devas and the Asuras were fighting, the Asuras defeated the Devas. The Devas said, quote, "It is on account of our having no chief or Rajotayo that Asuras defeat us. Let us create a Rajan," unquote. All agreed and kingship resulted. In other words, we can say that war begot the king, that is within quotes, which indeed has been one of the explanations for the origin of state in India. Now we go on to the theories on the origin of state in India. The state in ancient India was considered necessary for it ensured peace, order, and happiness. It was a social organization with political power. However, ancient scholars are not unanimous in their opinion with regard to the origin of the state. According to some, the state was the outcome of a contract, mainly political in nature, between rulers and the rules. They opine that prior to the origin of the state, there was something called a golden age, wherein the people enjoyed a life of peace, order, self-discipline, and happiness. Similarly, several other theories like the force theory, the patriarchal theory, the matriarchal theory, the divine origin theory, and finally the evolutionary theory were advanced to explain the origin of state. Amongst these theories, 4 are very important and have been discussed very often by scholars regarding the origin of state in India, like the social contract theory, the divine origin theory, the organic theory, and the Shoptango theory. Regarding the social contract theory, we have enough evidence in Buddhist and Brahmanical sources. The Buddhist text Anguttara Nikaya specially deals with this aspect of the origin of state in India, and according to them, both the Brahmanical and Buddhist Buddhist texts, there before the origin of state in India, people lived in happiness. Their wants were few, and there was no division among the people who existed on a very sublime, pristine plane. Now, but this situation could not continue. So, because there was frequent fights were regarding property which emerged at this time, and people had settled down, so they had property, families had emerged, and there were frequent disputes among them. So they formed a contract among themselves, and this elected somebody from amongst them who was most a very excellent person, a very capable person amongst them, as their king or a leader. Now he was called the Mahashammato, or who has been accepted by all the people. Now here we see that they had formed a contact amongst themselves to elect a leader so that peace could return. Now, there was subsequently other texts referred to a political contact where they set up a government. There was one, this was, there were various aspects of the phases of this to this theory, because the first phase was amongst the people, the contact was amongst the people. Now second phase was when they contacted with their leader, they formed a contact with the leader and formed a government. Regarding the second theory, divine origin theory, it is said that the state emerged as a state, or the king, there was no distinction at this moment, had emerged due to divine intervention. I have already mentioned that there was a fight between the gods and the asuras, and they approached Indra, who agreed to become the king in return for some kind of taxes. Now, according to the organic theory, we find that it is emphasized that there are different elements of the state and they depend on each other. This interdependence on different elements had given rise to the state as an institution in early India. According Kautilya and all the Smriti texts, they expound the Saptanga theory very elaborately. According to them, there are 7 organs of the state without which a state cannot work. Amongst them are Sami, or the leader, Amatto, or the Mantri, Janapado is the territory, Durgo is the fort, Kosho is the treasury, Bolo is army, and Mitra is friend or ally. So, according to them, to this ancient theory, a collaboration between all the elements that are available results in a proper functioning of the state. Now, I won't elaborate on these theories at this juncture because we have other modules which will be explaining all the theory elaborately. So, we go on to the next aspect of the state, that is the conception of a state. We go to the early Vedic conception of the state. As regards the Rig Vedic era, 2 points need emphasis. Firstly, the polity was still small in size. Political outlook was limited at this early stage. Secondly, monarchy was not yet hereditary, nor was the divine right theory overstrained in order to make monarchy irresponsible or arbitrary. Moreover, royal or chiefly authority was circumscribed by the tribal assemblies, especially the Sabha and the Samiti. But the early Vedic era did not last long. The polity expanded, and with it, political ideas underwent changes. Later Vedic literature mentions terms like Shamrat, which is used to denote a superior king, as referred to in the Vajrayani Samhita, or terms like Odhiraj, Ekrat, are found in the last mandal of the Rig Veda. These indicate that there was an elaboration of the power of the king. Subsequently, the Buddhist text Anguttara Nikaya informs us that there were 16 major territorial states, Mahajanapadas, of unequal size and power, and of both monarchical and non-monarchical types. The stage was now set ready for the emergence of state polities from previous lineage societies. Naturally, the conception of the state also had to accept certain modifications. Now, the Maurya and Gupta polities, the Brahmana and the Dharma Sutras give evidence to the fact that monarchy was no more elective. Kingship became hereditary, and as a consequence, the king was conceived of as almost divine. The king was more than a human king, for almost divine powers were attributed to him. His victories over his enemies were attributed to the divine help of Indra. Scholars claim that the early Indian kings, though conceived of as divine with several functional resemblances, were actively human and responsible rulers, graciously following human conventions. The ideal set before the king was one of energetic beneficence. The Arthashastra puts forward the kingly duty in simple and forceful language, setting an ideal which few civilizations can boast of. Comparing the king and the ascetic, the Arthashastra says, quote, in the happiness of his subjects lies the happiness, king's happiness. In the welfare of his subjects, his welfare. The king's good is not that which pleases him, but which pleases his subjects. However, Ashok was not the only king of India to proclaim that all men were his children, or to take pride in his ceaseless activity for the welfare of his subjects. Samudragupta, according to the opinion of the great emperor's court poet and panegyrist, Harishen too was imbibed with such ideas of paternal kingship. Now, at this juncture, I would just like to mention that all the high ideals that have been mentioned in the text were not always maintained by the rulers. We have, at the end of this module, I'll explain to you that there are instances when people revolted against the king and set him aside because he was not following the conventions that needed for good governance. Now we'll go on to explain the nature of state in ancient India. The early Vedic era, the main function of the chief was to protect the jono and cattle from the enemies. He was helped in his tasks by the tribal assemblies called Sabha, Shomiti, Vidhato, Gano and Porishad. Out of these, Sabha and Shomiti were the most important assemblies. All aspects of life were discussed in these assemblies. These may include wars, distribution of the spoils of war, judicious and religious activities, etc. Thus, these assemblies, in a way, limited the powers of the chiefs. Interestingly, women were also allowed to participate in the deliberations of the Sabha and Shomiti. The post of the chief was not hereditary. The tribe generally elected him, though the succession in one family was known, but that was not based on the rule of primogeniture. The Purohit assisted and advised the chief on various matters. Other than the Purohit, there were a limited number of other officials who assisted the chief in the day-to-day tribal affairs. Shenani, Kulapa, Gramani, etc. are some of the functionaries which find mention in the Rig Veda. The Sena or army was not a permanent fighting group and consisted of able-bodied tribesmen who were mobilized at the time of wars. Takshan the carpenter and Rathokaro the chariot maker were responsible for making chariots. There is no official mentioned as a collector of taxes. The people offered to the king what was called Bali. All this shows that early Vedic polity was an uncomplicated system based on the support and active participation of all the tribesmen. The situation, however, changed during the later Vedic phase. The later Vedic era, the Aryans, who were mainly cattle herders, became agriculturalists later. Assisted by the knowledge of iron technology, they were able to establish larger settlements in the Ganga Jamuna Doab. This is also revealed by the painted graveware archaeology and the contents of the later Vedic literature. The change precipitated a series of changes in other spheres of life. From an egalitarian tribal socio-political setup during the early Vedic period, it was transformed into a Varna divided, territorially based setup by the end of the Vedic period. The position of the tribal chiefs became hereditary, and the emerging officials usurped the role of the popular assemblies. The growing number of yaggas show the importance of the king as well as of the Brahmanas. Similarly, the gods who were important earlier lost their significance and gave way to new deities. All these changes ultimately resulted in the rise of Janapadas and Mahajanapadas, that is, bigger territorial states in the 6th century BCE. We go on to the later epochs when we see a definite change in the nature of state and their functions. In the later, we go on to the Mauryan phase. In the Mauryan phase witnessed bureaucratic centralizations based on the expanding economic activities of the state. The state control of various spheres of life could have been effective in the middle Ganga plains. Religion too was cleverly exploited for serving political ends. It is seen that Kautilya makes bold and deliberate use of superstition to secure the loyalty of the masses to the state by hoodwinking them. But by way of genuine deification of the king, there is little in his treatise. We go a little later in the Kushana and the Satavahana phase, we find decentralization of power when towns, feudatories and military elements came to the forefront was partly neutralized by emphasis on the divinity of the dead king. The Kushan princes assumed the official title of Devputra and instituted the cult of worship of the dead king. The Satavahana princes came to be compared to deified epic heroes. In the last phase of the state in ancient India, we find land grants played an important part in the formation of the political structure, and rulers conferred fiscal and administrative privileges on priestly and secular beneficiaries. From the 1st century CE onwards, decentralized administration was sustained by a marked growth in the powers of caste and professional guilds, and also of village headmen and elders. We come to the function of the states, where we mention the aims and ideals influencing the functions in the early Vedic era. The Vedic literature does not specifically discuss the aims and ideals of the state. Incidental observations made therein, however, enable us to gather that peace, order, security, and justice were regarded as its fundamental aims. The king, as the head of the state, was to be like Lord Varun, the upholder of law and order, Dhritabhrata. He was to punish the wicked and help the virtuous. Religion was to be promoted, morality was to be encouraged, and education was to be patronized. The aim, however, was to secure not only the moral but also the material well-being of his citizen. All-round welfare of the public was clearly regarded as its aim. Dharma, Artha, Kam are usually mentioned as the aims of the state. The state was to promote dharma by fostering a feeling of piety and religiousness, by encouraging all religion and sects, by maintaining free hospitals and feeding houses for the poor and decrepit, and by extending patronage to literature and sciences. The promotion of Artha was to be procured by encouraging trade, industry, and agriculture, by developing national resources, by bringing fresh land under cultivation, by building dams and canals to make agriculture independent of rain, by encouraging extensive and systematic working of mines. The state was to promote calm by ensuring peace and order so that each individual may enjoy life undisturbed, by offering encouragement to fine arts like music, dancing, painting, sculpture, and architecture in order to promote aesthetic culture. The functions, we go on to the classification of state functions. The functions of the state have been divided into two categories: constituent and ministrant. Those functions of the state which are required for the organization in society come under constituent functions. Under the ministrant, those activities of the state are included which are undertaken to promote people's welfare, thereby adding to the amenities of their life. Constituent functions include defense against foreign aggression, protection of property and people, and maintenance of law and order. Ministrant functions include education, sanitation, postal services, trade regulations, transport, and communication. Lastly, development of mines and forests and care of the poor. Now, how did the state in ancient India discharge these functions? Well-organized governments in ancient India, like the kingdoms of the Mauryas and the Guptas, discharged most of these constituent and ministrant functions. State jurisdiction extended over almost all spheres of life. However, the state did not discharge its diverse functions through its own bureaucracy only. The market superintendents and trade officers belonged to the state bureaucracy, but they worked in close connection with trade guilds and Brahman or Sramana assemblies. The state and its officers tried to harmonize the divergent interests after consultation with guilds and local assemblies, which were stable institutions than the state itself, thereby enjoying considerable prestige and confidence. We have tried in this module to explain how the state came into being, and of course along with it what was the nature of the state and the functions that were expected to be performed. Now, it's a very difficult task at this juncture to be very fluid about the explanation, because we do not get all the evidence that we have to within one text, or no one text explains all the aspects that we are trying to cover. Now, we have various aspects we have tried to collect various aspects of the module from different texts, and it is interesting to know that at least the scholars in ancient India have tried I would say rather the writers of ancient Indian texts have tried to explain the various aspects of polity which we are trying to gather and put together. Now, the thing that we witness that in the material milieu of the early Vedic age, the state was very simple. The helpers of the Rajan, who was a leader of the people or the leader of the cattle, had very little function just to protect the people and the cattle, which was considered to be a very important source of their wealth. But in the later Vedic period, we see that the king's powers have become very elaborate, and to reinforce his power and prestige, impress the people with his prestige, with a sense of the prestige of the king, the Brahmanas devised elaborate sacrifices like the Rajashua, the Bajapaya, and the Ashwamedha. Now, so in this material milieu, the Brahman had become very powerful. Now, also during this later Vedic period, we find that while in the early period, the king depended on the voluntary subscriptions from the people, during this period, Vaishyas were expected, who were the wealth-owning community of this society, where the Vaishyas were expected to give the king a kind of taxes. So we find that slowly, gradually, some aspects of the state were coming into being. But still, we do not find at this period any revenue collecting authority or a standing army, a standing army to which would make a state a permanent with all, which would indicate that the state had come into being. Now, most scholars regard the later Vedic period as a period of a proto-state. It is during the 6th century BC in the Buddhist text Anguttara Nikaya that we find territorial states being mentioned. They mention the 16 Mahajanapadas, and which have more monarchical, non-monarchical. They were not of equal sizes either. There was just some small, some large. And this situation mainly we can see in the middle Ganga Valley, from say extending from Allahabad to Bhagalpur, Allahabad in the east, in the west, to Bhagalpur in the east, and on both sides of the Ganges. Now, we find that over here, what I have mentioned in my module, that we find that emergence of territorial states from the early lineage societies, because all the four main characteristics of a state that was very essential is like the existence of a king, of a strong bureaucracy, of a treasury, of a revenue collecting authority, and a standing army, all had come into being. Now, along with this, we find a very interesting phenomena during the 6th century BC, the emergence of a second phase of urbanization, which we won't elaborate in this phase. During the later post-Vedic period, especially the Mauryan age, we find an essentially centralized state, when all the powers in every field, every aspect, polity, economy, society, the state exerts a very strong influence. This situation was a bit different in the Gupta period, when we find that it was a bit decentralized, and all the other institutions that existed during that time, like the guilds, assemblies, religious assemblies and all, participating in the administration. And in the last phase, we find a very different kind of situation, when land grants had become very important, and along with that, fiscal and judicial powers were being given or handed over to the Donis. So on the one hand, some scholars believe that the king's power was being continuously eroded during this period, and the other aspects, the local aspects had come into being, the local power bases had come to being, like the Donis who were accepting the land grants. Though this theory has not been accepted by all the scholars, there are some who would point out that everything was not quite so different. There were very different aspects, but there was still a strong government at the center during this time. So overall, there are not too much agreement regarding the various theories that are being forwarded for the various period of early Indian history. But we get what is interesting, that we do get a comprehensive idea about what kind of polity existed in early India. I hope I have been able to clear your doubts regarding the module. If you, for further information, please visit EPG Pathshala. You will be getting more information about the various modules. So, thank you.